The boy rode in just after dawn, boots too clean and coat too stiff, wearing a badge that hung awkward on his chest like a dare. No one looked twice at first. Every town had a green deputy or two sent in to fail. Most lasted until the first night a bottle got broken or a whore got hit hard enough to scream. Then they'd vanish, back to where their mamas prayed or their papas drank, depending on how they were made. This one he didn't even have dust on him. 17 maybe, though the kind of 17 that still hadn't bled much. Light hair, cut close, eyes like glass over cold creek water. Didn't carry a long gun, just a sidearm and a folding knife on his belt, neither of which looked used. The sheriff introduced him with a shrug at the town hall steps. Deputy Callan Finch was all he said, then went back inside, not bothering with ceremony. The sheriff didn't like to make things last. People smirked, murmured bets. 1 week tops. Callan nodded once and stepped off the wood porch like he meant it. He walked the dirt street like he'd memorized it in his sleep. Saloon, stable, mercantile, post, jail. No sign of nerves, but he didn't make noise either. Moved light. He watched people more than he talked. Even the old drunk with the cleft lip and the two-card deck that never left his coat, Bo Kershaw, said he gave him the chills. "He ain't blank," Bo muttered one afternoon from his stool by the saloon rail. "He's hidden, that's worse." The town was called Marrow. Half a day's ride to the next water source, full day to the border. Scrubland mostly, with cliffs like broken teeth in the north and wide gulches cutting east through blood-colored soil. Back then, Marrow was a pit stop for freight wagons and men hiding from names they'd shed. It had no bank, no doctor, no school. It had 6 working girls, 2 butchers, and a preacher who never showed his hands. No one in Marrow trusted justice. The last lawman who tried to clean up the Miller clan lost his tongue. They hung it from the church bell as warning. Callan walked past that bell each morning at sunrise. He never looked up. He started small, broke up a card game where a knife got drawn, took in a drunk who shot at shadows behind the livery, hauled a man off a girl's skirt before he got her legs apart. That man came back the next week to spit at Callan's boots. The boy didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked at him until the man forgot why he came. By the 3rd week, folks started keeping distance. Callan never shouted, never smiled, but he watched everything. That's what scared them. He watched like he was storing it up, waiting. He didn't gamble, didn't drink, didn't whore. He carved little notches in a bit of wood he kept in his pocket. Sat under the eaves of the jail at dusk, whittling with slow patience while the rest of the town rotted loud around him. Some thought he was simple. Others thought he was dead inside. The girls at Miss Langley's said he never came calling, never even looked, but one swore she saw him out back once, kneeling by the graveyard gate, just kneeling, not praying, not weeping, hands clasped, eyes shut. "Like a boy speaking to ghosts," she whispered, shivering. Then came the day the Blackthorn riders rode through. 7 men, all dressed in dark dusters, 3 with warrants on their heads and 2 others who'd left their law badges behind in other states. They swaggered into town like they owned it, kicking over troughs and laughing loud enough to send dogs yelping. The sheriff didn't move from his chair. He was in the saloon by then, sweating through his shirt, drunk before noon. He wasn't long for Marrow. Everyone knew that. When the riders entered the mercantile, they didn't bother haggling, took what they wanted and paid with threats. The owner, old Mr. Tillman, had lost a son to that kind of man once. He didn't argue, just nodded, voice tight, eyes to the floor. Callan stood outside on the boardwalk, watching. They came out laughing, jaws slick with tobacco, their coats swinging open to show iron tucked against their hips. One spotted Callan and grinned. "Pretty badge for a boy," he said. Callan didn't reply. Another stepped closer. "Where's your mama, son? She know you play and dress up." Still silence. The first rider's smile dropped. "Maybe you don't hear so good." "Hey, Drew." Callan shot him in the neck. Not the chest, not the gut. The neck close range, surgical, just below the jaw hinge. Blood jetted. The rider dropped backward and flailed, boots kicking as if he'd been electrocuted. Then he stopped. The others froze. Callan didn't move. His revolver was already reholstered, like he'd practiced the draw 1,000 times. No one knew where the sheriff was, probably under a table. The riders looked to each other, waiting for one to lead, but something had changed. The quiet boy hadn't flinched, hadn't hesitated. The one who did was already dead. "We'll be back," the tallest one said, voice a growl. Callan nodded once. "Good." They rode out just before dusk, leaving their dead man in the dirt. Callan didn't bury him, didn't even drag the body out of the sun. He went back to the jail, shut the door, and sat down on the step with his knife and wood. He carved 2 new notches that night. They thought he was just a boy with a badge. But something old had followed him into Marrow, something that didn't need witnesses or warnings, just time. And by the end of the month, they'd all be dead. 3 days passed before the sheriff's body was found. He'd been strung up behind the slaughterhouse, hung not by rope but by the wire used to tie calves. It had cut deep into his neck, biting through flesh and sinew. No sign of a struggle, no blood on the ground. His gun was still holstered. His boots neatly placed beside him, as if he'd taken them off before the dying. They didn't call it murder, not out loud. In Marrow, words like that stirred too much air. Folks said it was bad luck, or justice come round, or that maybe he'd done it himself, though no one believed that. The sheriff had been gutless, not grief-struck. Callan didn't attend the burying. He stood outside the jail, arms folded, face blank. The new sheriff, a leathery, pock-cheeked man named River Cobb, rode in from Wicket Bend with a star pinned higher on his vest than it ought to be. He looked Callan up and down, said nothing, then spat to the side and walked on. By then, Callan was walking the town alone. No one laughed anymore, no one tried to test him. The blood on the street from the Blackthorn man had dried into the dirt, but the stain didn't fade. Every morning Callan walked past it, boots never touched the mark. Cobb thought him strange, tried to question him, prod at where he'd learned to shoot like that. Callan didn't answer. When Cobb pressed, Callan slid his knife halfway from its sheath and said in a voice like cold steel, "You don't need to know." Cobb never asked again. It was around that time the letters started arriving, slipped under doors at night. No names, just symbols, a circle carved with 4 strokes through the center. Each one left at a doorstep belonged to a man who had taken something not freely given, a girl's virtue, a widow's land, a boy's life. All had walked free, until now. First was Elmer Grigsby, the butcher. Found with his hands bound in the pig pen, face down in the filth, throat opened from ear to ear, nothing taken but the eyes. Next was Joel Craddock, who used to run the freight lines till he lost them in a card game, then lost his mind when he tried to burn the winner's family in their home. The charges were dropped, said he was drunk, said no one really died. He was found nailed to the doors of the half-burnt cabin, heart cut out and placed beside his head. Cobb tried to call for help from the county, but the telegraph lines had been slashed, neat, quick, surgical. Horses sent east never came back. Messages to Fort Laramie vanished in smoke. People began locking their doors before dusk. Women watched the hills with rifles. Men whispered prayers they hadn't used since childhood. The saloon stayed quiet, Miss Langley's girls walked nowhere alone, and children stopped asking questions. Callan never changed. He still whittled, still walked, still wore his badge like a curse. And each time another man was found dead, he carved another notch in the wood. Cobb knew he knew but had no proof, couldn't find tracks, couldn't catch him in the act. But something cold rooted in his gut, and each time Callan passed by, the sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun. Then came the night it all broke open. The Blackthorn riders returned. They came at full gallop, 6 deep now, having buried their 7th in Marrow's dirt. Guns strapped across their backs, mouths dry with rage. They didn't stop at the outskirts. They rode straight to the jail, fired 2 rounds into the air, and dragged Cobb into the street. He was drunk, always was after sundown. They kicked his gun away and beat him bloody before the town even stirred. "We come for the boy," said the tallest, "and this time we don't leave less he's in the ground." They waited, no one spoke, no one moved. Until the jailhouse door creaked open. Callan stepped out like he'd been standing just behind it the whole time. Coat buttoned to the neck, hat low, eyes brighter than the lanterns that swung in the wind. He didn't speak, just stared. "You murdered one of ours," the tall man growled, "and you'll die for it." Callan looked at Cobb, who lay bleeding into the dust. "You took too long," Callan said. He stepped forward, and in the same breath, the world erupted. 6 shots cracked like thunder. 2 men fell instantly, their chests caved in. One screamed, short, wet, dying. Another tried to ride, but his horse bucked as a bullet tore through its flank, throwing him headlong into a trough. Callan walked into the chaos like it was a memory, calm, mechanical. His revolver moved with precision no boy should have. It was artless, practiced, ugly in its perfection. When it ended, 5 bodies lay twitching or still. The 6th man, tall, mean, scarred across the temple, knelt in the street with blood soaking one leg, fingers broken, gun flung from reach. Callan stood over him, breathing through his nose. "You know what you're doing," the man spat. "This ain't law, this is slaughter." Callan nodded. "I know." Then he knelt and pressed the barrel to the man's temple. "You killed my brother." The man blinked, confused. "I don't even know you." "You wouldn't," Callan said. "He was 12. Just a boy with a knife trying to protect our mother when you came through Wiccan's Pass. You buried him there, left him for the buzzards. My ma screamed till you crushed her throat." Recognition bloomed slowly, like a rot. Callan didn't wait. One more shot echoed into the night. No one counted notches anymore. There were too many. By morning the bodies were gone, buried or burned, no one knew. Cobb had vanished too, though some said they saw him riding out west before sunrise, blood still dripping from his boot. Callan remained. He stood on the same porch, sat on the same step, watched the same street. The badge still hung on his chest. But no one called him a boy anymore. The rains came late that year. Not the gentle kind that softened dust into mud, but storms that howled like wolves down from the canyons, slamming against rooftops, ripping shingles, flattening fences. Thunder rolled through the scrublands like cannon fire. Lightning lit the ridge where the dead had been taken, and in its flash, some swore they saw figures that shouldn't stand. Callan didn't seek shelter. He walked the road through town, soaked to the bone, hat dripping, coat clinging to his lean frame. He made rounds even when there was no one left to watch. Even when the jail sat empty and the doors to the mercantile hung loose on broken hinges. Marrow had gone quiet, not empty, no, but hushed. The saloon no longer played piano. The church stopped lighting its candles. People kept to themselves, eyes averted. No one dared call for help and no one asked who was next. The rain washed away the old blood, but the ground remembered. One evening, just as the storm began to break, a girl appeared. 16, maybe 17, ragged dress, barefoot, hair slicked flat against her head. She walked down the main road like she'd risen from the earth, her face pale and smeared with something darker than mud. She carried a satchel and a shotgun nearly as tall as her. Her name was Wren. She didn't flinch when Callan stepped out to meet her, didn't speak either. Just stared at him with the kind of gaze you only see in someone who's outlived too much. There was something alike in them, something bone-deep and buried. When he asked her where she came from, she pointed east. Out by Salt Draw, they burned the mill house. My brother was inside. Callan nodded once. They wear black dusters. One had a red band, looked like blood. He turned toward the ridge. The sky behind him was dark as coal. "You ate." She shook her head. "Follow me." They didn't speak again for days. She slept in the jail's back room, her shotgun always within reach. He gave her his rations and said nothing when she refused to cry. Each night, she watched him carve the wood with his blade, deliberate, slow, with the precision of someone measuring out pain. On the 4th night, she asked him what it was. "A reckoning," he said. "You keep track of how many you've killed." He didn't answer, just handed her a second block of wood. "You'll need your own." It wasn't long before Wren joined him on patrol. He didn't teach her to shoot, she already knew. She took down a coyote at 70 paces and never blinked. Her hands didn't tremble. Callan saw in her the same hollow he'd carried since Wiccan's Pass. Word began to spread. Across the plains, through mining camps, between travelers on the run, rumors of Marrow's ghost deputy and the girl with the bone-white stare. Some claimed they were cursed. Others said they were spirits bound to vengeance. But no one doubted what they'd done. And then, one by one, the men responsible for Salt Draw began to die. Not publicly, not with gallows or gunfights, quietly, precisely. The first was a bounty hunter named Kesh. Found dangling upside down from the old water tower, wrists slit, blood drained into the trough below. The second was a smuggler, Bar Wit, last seen riding north before his horse returned without him, saddle soaked in something that steamed in the cold. The third, he didn't die easy. His name was Reeve Sloane, former cavalry turned mercenary. He'd laid low in the copper towns, living under a false name, until one evening he got careless and stepped into a saloon. Wren was waiting. She walked up behind him while he played cards, pressed her shotgun muzzle to the base of his skull, and said nothing. Just stood there, breathing slow. One of the gamblers tried to reach for a pistol. Callan stepped out from the shadows, his voice sharp and flat. "Don't." Reeve turned, sweating. Recognition spread across his face like rot. "It was just a job," he rasped. "They paid us, that's all. I didn't light the fire." "You watched it burn," Wren said. He laughed, desperate. "You think this makes you better than me?" She pulled the trigger. The saloon windows shattered. They left before the law came, not that any would chase them. In the jail that night, Wren cleaned the shotgun in silence. Her hands moved steady. When she finished, she carved her first mark into the wood block Callan had given her. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders shifted, like she'd grown heavier, or maybe just truer. "You think we'll ever stop?" she asked. Callan didn't look up from his knife. "We'll stop when it's over." "And when that?" "When the last one dies." "Then what?" Callan paused. For the first time in days, he looked her in the eye. "Then we bury the badge." Wren nodded once. That night she didn't sleep. The next morning, a letter arrived, pinned to the door of the jail with a rusted nail. It bore the symbol of a crow, wings outstretched. No words, just that. Wren touched it with one finger, then looked to Callan. He stared into the distance, jaw tight. "That's the last name on my list," he said. She picked up her shotgun, slung her satchel. "Then let's finish it." They rode out at dawn, with no trail behind them. Callan took the North Pass, where the shale crumbled under the hooves and the air turned thin. Wren followed without question, wrapped in her father's old coat, hair tied back, the shotgun resting against her spine like it belonged there. Neither spoke for miles. The horizon was all rock and sky, bleeding into one another with the slow ache of distance. No one tried to stop them. Marrow let them go like the dead being lowered. The crow mark had meant one thing: Hollow Bend. A canyon carved by wind and time, hidden 2 days' ride through the flats. It wasn't on maps anymore. Hadn't been since the war ended, and the men who came back needed somewhere to bury what they'd done. Stories said it was where deserters gathered, where guns for hire made camp, and where justice stopped at the rim. It was also where the man who called himself Cade Ellison had gone to ground. Callan remembered his face the way a scar remembers a blade, weathered, lean, eyes the color of spent shells. Cade had worn a marshal's star once, had ridden through settlements like he was the law of God, but he'd sold that star to men who dealt in blood. He stood silent while Callan's mother begged. He'd kicked the boy's brother aside with the flat of his boot. He turned away when the worst of it happened. Now he commanded what was left of the old mercenary rings, hidden in the canyon with others like him. Men who'd given up names, men who laughed at the idea of judgment. Callan rode to end that laughter. They reached the edge of Hollow Bend just before dusk on the second day. The sky hung low, red and streaked with ash-colored clouds. The canyon opened below them like a wound. Smoke rose from fires within, and the faint echo of shouting came up with the wind. Wren dismounted first. "How many you think?" Callan scanned the bend, watched how the shadows curled around the rocks, how the light played off steel. "Too many for daylight." Wren knelt beside him, pulled a bundle of cloth from her satchel. Inside, lengths of fuse, old sticks of dynamite, caps wrapped in oilskin. Callan raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get that?" "My uncle used to mine the river cliffs, showed me how to drop half a mountain in a day." Callan nodded. "Good." They waited until night. Dark came sudden in the canyon, swallowing the wind, deadening sound. Wren slipped through the brush like a fox, quick and quiet, planting charges at the high points, tucking fuses into the cracks. Callan followed lower, creeping through the gorge like a shadow, marking sentries, memorizing patrols. When the moon hit its peak, he found Cade Ellison. He was older now, thicker in the gut, hair gone gray, but the eyes were the same. He sat near a fire, surrounded by hard men, killers, smugglers, thieves, and laughed like he'd never lost a thing. Callan watched from the ridge. His fingers brushed the grip of his revolver. But he didn't shoot. Not yet. Wren signaled from the slope, a faint flicker of light, all charges set. Callan nodded once and moved. The first explosion didn't kill anyone. It split the west wall of the canyon, dropping stone and dirt into the fire pit, scattering men like ants. The second blast shook the east trail, sending horses shrieking into the dark. Callan dropped into the chaos with pistol drawn. He moved like silence, shot low, fast, never wasting a round. 3 men fell before they knew they were being hunted. Another tried to run and took a bullet to the spine. Wren worked from the high ground, picking off the ones who scattered wide, her shotgun roaring like thunder in the dark. They split the camp in half. Smoke choked the gorge, fire licked at the brush, screams bounced off stone like they belonged there. Cade tried to rally, drew his long rifle, called for a flank. Callan stepped into the firelight. The older man froze. For a breath, he didn't recognize the figure. Then the memory surfaced. The boy from Wiccan's Pass. The one he left alive. Callan didn't raise his gun, not yet. He walked slow, steady past the bodies, past the burning wagons, past the last men falling back. Blood slicked his coat. His badge glinted in the fire. Cade's voice cracked. "You don't have to do this." Callan stopped 5 paces away. "I know." Cade swallowed. "It was orders. We were told they were sheltering rebels. You think I wanted it to go that way?" You smiled. Cade's hand twitched toward the rifle. Wren appeared behind him. "No," she said. Cade turned just in time to see her pull the trigger. The blast knocked him forward, chest shredded, breath ripped out in one terrible sound. He hit the dirt hard and didn't move again. Silence followed. Nothing but the crackle of fire and the settling of ash. Wren knelt, breathing hard. Callan stood over the body. He didn't carve a notch. Not this time. Instead, he dropped the wooden block onto the dead man's chest. Let it rest there. The next morning, they buried the badge. Not in town, not in stone, but in a crevice along the canyon rim, beneath a flat rock, beside a patch of dry sage. Callan placed it down without ceremony. Wren stood beside him. "You done?" she asked. He didn't answer. He looked out over the canyon, let the wind tug at his coat, let the silence settle. Then he turned, walked back to the horses. Wren followed. They didn't speak again until the sun was high and the canyon was behind them. But something had changed. The boy with the badge was gone. What rode out of Hollow Bend was something else. Something colder, something free. The prairie after Hollow Bend felt wider. Not freer, not safer, just wider. Like the world had stretched around them, thin and hollow and strange, the kind of silence that followed old violence. The kind that tasted like metal on the tongue and left the air too still. They rode south, not fast. There was no chase behind them now, no list left to follow. But still they moved because neither knew how to stop. Wren asked once, as they crossed the dry plain where vultures circled low, "Where we goin'?" Callan answered with a shrug, "Where they don't know us." That night they made camp by a dead windmill. The blades creaked faintly in the dark. Wren cooked what was left of their meat over a spit, her fingers black with soot. Callan sat with his back to the fire, eyes toward the hills. His revolver lay across his lap, cleaned and reloaded, though no one had fired a shot since Cade Ellison's spine turned to dust. "You sleep at all?" she asked. He didn't turn, some. "You ever dream?" He was quiet a long time, then not since I was 12. Wren didn't ask more. By morning, they rode again. Word of Hollow Bend had already spread, not by telegraph or messenger, but through whispers, through the tracks of the terrified who made it out, that the boy deputy had come through like a plague, that he'd wiped out the canyon men in one night, that the girl he rode with had a ghost's aim and a killer's hands. Some said they weren't real. Others swore they were the last vengeance spirits of the war. soldiers from nowhere, come to settle the old blood debts. But Callan and Wren didn't look like myths when they stopped in the river town of Kester's Ford. They looked tired, lean, dust-caked. They left their horses outside the tavern and stepped in without a word. The place quieted. Faces turned, stiffened, looked away. They didn't have to announce themselves. The stories had run faster than they had. The bartender, a one-armed man with a crow tattoo, poured 2 glasses and slid them down without being asked. "On the house," he muttered. Callan didn't drink his, just stared at the glass. Wren sipped once, then looked at him. "We're ghosts now," she said. "Maybe. You want to be." "No." "Then what now?" Callan stood. There was a man in the back corner, a small man, half buried in shadow, with slick hair and a twitch in his left eye, a bounty broker. Callan had seen his kind before, made a living buying names, selling them to whoever offered blood money. He had a ledger in his lap, and Callan knew without looking his name was in it. So was hers. Callan crossed the room in silence. The broker didn't look up until the shadow fell across his table. Then he flinched, closed the book too late. Callan saw the symbol on the page, a badge, scrawled in ink, marked over with a black X. "How much?" Callan asked. The man swallowed. 500 for you, 350 for the girl. Wren was at his side now. "Who posted it?" she asked. The broker hesitated. "Don't know names, just buyers. They're out east. Told me to wait for sightings." Callan leaned in close. "I'm not a name you sell," he said. Then he reached down and took the ledger. The broker started to protest. Callan pressed the barrel of his Colt into the man's chest and waited for him to go quiet again. Wren stood behind him, watching, not smiling, just waiting. They left the tavern with the book. That night they burned it page by page in a dry riverbed outside of town. Every name, every price, let it turn to smoke. After, they sat beside the dying fire. Wren stared at the last ember curling in the wind. "Think they'll keep coming?" Callan nodded. "Until we disappear." She looked up at him, shadows carving hollows under her eyes. "You know how to disappear." Callan didn't answer. But the next day they left their coats in the river, left the weapons buried beneath a sycamore tree marked by a single cross, rode out in plain clothes on nameless horses, no badge, no symbols, no trail. They rode west until the land changed color, until the trees grew thick and the soil grew soft. Found a valley no one had named, a place too quiet for violence, too far for law. They built a cabin near a creek. It took months, the roof leaked and the nails bent in the cold, but it stood. Wren planted corn, Callan cut timber. They didn't talk about the past, didn't need to. Some nights he'd sit on the porch and listen to the creek, one hand on the knife he never quite gave up. She'd sit beside him, close but not touching, shotgun resting against the doorframe. No words. Just breath. Just silence. They thought he was just a boy with a badge. But they were wrong. He wasn't justice, he wasn't vengeance. He was the end of things. And now, finally, he was done.